cannot put my foot on the floor, and I'm not listening to Lacey God or a checkered flag.
Hello, and welcome back to episode 2 of Racing Thoughts, an IndyCar podcast. I am your host, Meg and Dennis, alongside
Megan Taylor. Hello.
Today, a lot to cover, more off track than on track, in my personal opinion. Wrapping up from Detroit and then previewing into, where are we going? Road America?
Yep. So lots to talk about.
So just to, I guess, dive into Detroit in general, shortest race of the year, shortest track of the year, 100-lap street course. Personally, I guess we'll delve into this talking about the race. I didn't love it. I haven't watched Belle Isle, but I think I agree with the drivers who were saying that, Belle Isle's a better track.
100%.
I didn't find the streets of downtown Detroit anything to write home about as far as the race goes.
Yeah, I think it has potential for being a very good track, because going through the streets of Detroit, I think, would be really cool for Indy itself. But I just think that they kind of transitioned from Belle Isle into this street course without kind of fully thinking things through. I mean, we touched on it last week. My biggest qualm with it is how tight the track actually is, and the concrete barriers. So it's just okay, you have that really, really tight, racing line, which then breeds all of this chaos, which is exactly what we saw. And then couple that with the unsafe, barriers. It's just it's not my favorite, but it could be really cool. And I'm going to just fully out myself here before we actually get into it. I only watched 53 laps of it. You guys saw on the Racing Thoughts Instagram, I had to watch it at work. And then work got in the way, because that's apparently a thing I have to do now. Ew. So I only got to watch about half of it. And of course, it was 95% under caution. So just absolute chaos from what I had seen. But at the same time, it was also really boring because of how many cautions there were. That's insane.
Well, and then it's on the flip side of, I watched it twice because, both of us were watching it on delay for various reasons of the weekend, but I watched it twice because I fell asleep the first time because it was all under caution and I got bored.
You did not.
Just the sounds of Townsend and Hinch apparently put me right to sleep.
They do have very soothing voices, and then you just hear the vroom vroom of the cars. It's just,
It was raining outside. It was dark in my house. It happens.
I love that. So, Detroit, man, what happened?
Let's also kind of dive into some of the off-track stuff, because I think that feeds into what happened as well. First off, you got Bloomquist being benched for at least this race and at least Road America coming up. Mutually agreed upon, and rumors on the street, though, doesn't sound great for the rest of the season. So I guess that'll be something kind of to watch, with Helio Castroneves filled in for this weekend and next weekend. And I guess we'll see with whatever's coming up after what that's going to tell. They're still saying he's part of, the Meyer-Shanks family, but I think that'll be an interesting place.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be something to keep an eye on. I'm really interested. I wish I could have been a fly on the wall for that conversation and how they got to that decision, because Blomqvist is still a rookie, despite having successes in other series and in other races. He's still a rookie, and yeah, sure, he bottled turn 1 in the 500 and took out Ericsson and Fittipaldi, but we're only 5 races into the season, and benching him for 2 for seemingly just what happened at the 500 when it was an oval. I'm I don't know if I fully agree with that, but that's only the information that we have been given. So I'm I'm not paid enough to make those decisions. So, my opinion doesn't really count for much, but I am shocked that they did bench him for 2 races, being so early in the season, and he's a rookie. It doesn't make sense to me. So it feels like there's a lot of other stuff that have gone on behind the scenes scenes that we just aren't privy to. So I'm like, me being a nosy Nelly, I wish I knew.
Yeah, I'll echo that of like there's definitely, I would assume, more to the story. So I guess that'll be a piece to continue to watch and see what kind of delves from that. Yeah. So that was kind of early in the week kind of news that broke.
Yeah, it really started the week of just weirdness, because then we get Flava Flav and Will Power.
Which is a continuing thing that just makes me so happy. And like
what
I
a
don't
duo.
get it. And truly, like, is there anything better? I don't think there is.
Rossi and his commentary on the whole situation.
Yes. That there is better, and it is Alex Rossi talking about Flava Flav and Will Power.
So good. Yeah. So we got that. That was, when did we see that again? Was that during the parade?
Yes. Well, he was at the Indy 500 as well.
And I know that
and then
was
he's just
parade on the cars and everything.
Yeah.
And
then he was in Detroit, which I'm not an expert on Flava Flav by any means. So like, I think he lives in Detroit, but
yeah,
he may have also just come to support Will Power. I don't know, but it's fun and it makes me very happy.
They're besties.
Honestly, Flava Flav is living the life that I want to live. I also just want to be a hype man for an IndyCar driver. So like,
very true.
There's a few not allowed on that list, but there's a bunch. Hit me up. I'm a great bench person. I will be there. You will be very hyped. You will probably want me to shut up, but that's fine.
Can attest, the best hype woman right there. Yeah, and so going into the actual race itself, we had like a couple of the practice sessions had a lot of tension between the drivers. I mean, one of the major things that Detroit is known for, at least with this circuit, is the double pit lane, which is always chaos. So like that always plays a big part of it, of these tensions, because I mean, having a double pit lane, you're guaranteed to have something go wrong. So you were the one that actually was able to like watch the practice sessions and see what went down. So like fill us in on the drama, because once again, the stupid work thing got in the way of me being able to watch these sessions, which sucks.
Definitely practice 2 got real interesting with Santino Ferrucci, Kyle Kirkwood, and Colton Herta. I'm going to try to check my bias at the door here. But a lot of just kind of back and forth between Santino and Kyle and like going around the track and everything. And Ferrucci fully turned in to Kyle. And then in the pit lane, Kyle went to go talk to him. Ferrucci started shoving him, yelling at him, like fully just kind of escalated into something that didn't ever need to be. And then I guess probably before that, when they were still out on track, Ferrucci kept swerving in front of Herta. So Herta was just like, whatever, I'll run his lap as well. I don't care. It's just practice. There's a lot of really good kind of quippy comments from Colton that are very much worth going to listen to. But, it's not the first time we've seen Santino Ferrucci have issues with drivers. He and Grosjean got into it again. They've been beefing for over a year now.
And it's ramped up recently too. Like, I felt like over the past year it's been very sporadic, and now it's just like, okay, we can consistently guarantee that there's going to be an issue between those two.
Yeah, like it kicked off at Barber between them, and now it's been like every single race since then, where Santino just made a lot of comments that weren't okay by any means, and I do not support this man. I will not support this man. I kind of think he, if he was in NASCAR, he'd be having a lot of drivers come meet him at the back of his motorhome for probably to get into a fight. And I'm not saying he deserves it, but I'm saying that, like, if you run your mouth enough, things have a tendency to boil over. And Kyle Kirkwood's a driver that everyone seems to like. So if you're trying to sit here and blame him as the problem, but you're the one repeatedly having issues with multiple drivers, maybe check your own bias.
Yeah. And I'm going to be a lot less kind about it. You're going to make homophobic comments on the first day of Pride Month. Like, you just lost every ounce of credibility. Like, I cannot get behind you at all. And it's absurd. Like, one, in this day and age, in 2024, making a homophobic comment on live TV when everyone can see you and everyone knows it's going to be you, that in and of itself is up. But then doing it on June 1st, again, the first day of Pride Month, you couldn't even hold up back your homophobia for a single day. Like, it just puts such a sour taste in my mouth. And like, it really pisses me off. I can't understand it. I can't get behind it. And I have no problem calling a spade a spade. So I don't like you, Santino Ferrucci, for being a homophobic piece of
You said it. I echo the sentiments. And I just look at this man's track history, and there's plenty of receipts. If you want them, DM the podcast. I will send them to you. But he's got banned from F2 for a reason. He's a problem, and both on track and off track. And I don't support him. I refuse to support him in any capacity.
Yeah.
And eventually, I think someone in the powers to be needs to step in, and there needs to be reprimands for what he's happening here. I mean,
100%. It does worry me, though, that knowing his history with F2 and having the FAA ban him for very similar things, having him just be openly welcomed into IndyCar, and it's like this past week, as a result of this happening, I have seen so many people online, like, just discovering all of these things, like myself included. Yeah. Like, I had no idea any of this, especially about the F2 stuff. Like, I just knew him as like a driver on track that has had issues with other drivers for racing reason. And so understanding and learning and uncovering this backstory has just made it that much more distasteful. Yeah. And like, if whatever powers that be have been fine with all of this stuff until now, what's it going to take for the action to actually be taken place? Like, you're now starting to get into Teddy Porkchop, your boy, and Canapino too. Like, there's issues off track there where Theo is now getting death threats from a racing incident that happened very early on in the race when there were lots of racing incidents. And like, IndyCar had just put out like a very brief statement being like, no, we don't support this. We don't condone this type of behavior. And I'm like, okay, great, but that feels like smoke and mirrors. And so going back to like the Ferrucci stuff, it's just kind of like, is it all smoke and mirrors again? Or are they even going to care? I don't know. And so I would really hope that something comes of it, but I'm not counting on it, which really sucks.
No, I'm not either, because the fact that like there hasn't been a statement made, other than, if anything, it's almost been ignored more, because like I had to go hunt down like the clip of the like homophobic comments that Ferrucci said through Twitter, because it wasn't on the NBC like clips, it wasn't on the replays, because I'm watching this and like I saw it online, I was just like, okay, like I completely believe he said it, but what did he say? And I mean, they fully just clipped the audio, and I get it from that capacity, from like a media capacity, of why they're like, okay, we don't support this, so we're not going to put it out there for it to be able to access. But at the same time, it needs to be more than just we clip it in the thread, which is very much how it's reading right now.
100%. Like, it feels like it's just being swept under the rug. Like, oh, don't address it, it doesn't exist. Versus like, okay, again, I'm right there with you in terms of like, oh, we're clipping it because we don't want that type of language and that type of behavior to be a part of our broadcast. So for sure, clip it, but acknowledge that something went down. Talk about why you clipped it and why it's not a part of your media presence and why you don't want it to be there. And then bare minimum, talk about the impact as well. Like, the impact of hearing a driver say those types of things is insane. So it's just like, it is very much being swept under the rug way more than anything else. And I think that is also part of why I have such an issue with all of this as well. It's like, doesn't go away just because you ignore it.
I mean, you brought it up even with Theo Porcher and obviously Canapino and everything happening with that. It's like, statements have been made, which I'm glad to see, but very clearly either like Junko Hollinger, whatever team he races for. We're learning those. Y'all will figure that out eventually. But this isn't the first time. It happened with Callum Ilott last year. It's kind of what led to him losing his seat. They're putting out these statements, but like, you go read his statement, like Canapino's statement, and that boy don't care.
I have not seen a single death threat directed at those who claim to have received them. From last year to today, no one in their right mind would do such a thing. It's outrageous to be accused of this so lightly, and I won't allow it anymore. The part that really irks me about Canapino's statement as well is two main things. Right? So, first being that statement that I just read, one of those paragraphs where he's like, I haven't seen it, so it must not exist. And I'm like, that is the dumbest mentality to have, especially in something as serious as another person receiving death threats. And like you mentioned, this isn't the first time that something like this has happened with you. So, again, the willful ignorance of it really bothers me. But then the part that I think is most upsetting comes after that, where he says, I constantly receive abuse and hate, and I have learned to live with it, as many people do, choosing to ignore it. Okay, so you've just also contradicted yourself then. You said in the previous paragraph, I haven't seen any of this abuse or hate. And then following, I constantly receive it. So which is it? Do you see it or not? Make up your mind. And like, if you do see it in the way that you said in that part of your statement, then why the are you allowing that to happen to somebody else? Like, you should not want someone else to deal with that if you have experienced it yourself. So I'm like, that has really altered my perspective of Canapino as well. Like, I don't agree with his statement, but then he's also like liking things on Twitter that contradict his statement that he's put out. I mean, like, this is 100% a PR written statement. He did not write this.
Or if he did, no PR team read through it. And even if they did, they didn't do a good job.
Yeah. But like, that's
all
definitely a PR decision, is to make a statement like that,
Yes.
being like, no, whatever, deny. And then you have your actions of liking those things on Twitter that are hating on Callum and on Theo. So I'm just like, you're fueling the fire.
And he knows what he's doing.
Mhm.
You know, I already had a sour taste just from what I had heard last year. Because I like Callum a lot. I've liked Callum a lot longer than I've probably really been into IndyCar, just from him being on Screaming Meals, him being an F2, like just being kind of aware of him. And so knowing how, like, what kind of led to him losing his seat. And we've seen that Duco's Hollinger has chosen where they want to land, and now they're showing it again even more. And at least, and I don't want to say at least, because that tracks from it, like, they're not teammates this time, so yes, it's different, but it's still, we're supporting our driver. Yes, we're going to put out these statements, but clearly actions don't match words. I'm not, I guess, saying I am pro penalty for either of these situations with, you know, Ferrucci, Canapino, in general for drivers. But at some point, I think there doesn't need to be repercussions for actions that are unbecoming of the series. And that's where it needs to come from, of the series saying, hey, we don't support this, we don't stand by this, and we don't want our other drivers, because now you have 3 coworkers who are put in places of not, well, Colton maybe a little less so, but like Ferrucci literally put his hands on Kyle Kirkwood and nothing happened when Kyle didn't do a thing. Teddy Porkchop's literally like getting death threat
for a racing incident.
Listen, no, they both stayed on track. Neither of them were out of the race. And like Theo got a penalty for it. Like, you know, for some, it was, and a race that was stupid. It was a non-issue that has been so much more. And I hope it's more than this fast statement that we got.
Agreed. And I think for me as well, a big part of it is the fact that, like, okay, incidents and things can get blown out of proportion, heat of the moment. 100%. One, you need to take accountability for that. It's just being an adult. I teach my students every day, you screw up, it's not the end of the world, but you have to take responsibility for the things that you do and said. Because even if you didn't mean it in the heat of the moment, you still have an impact because of your reactions. Intent and impact do not always coincide. And so I can understand that if something like this, for both of these cases, had been maybe the first time that something like this has ever happened, okay, maybe there's a little bit more of a grace period, but it has been a repetitive issue. This isn't the first time Canapino's had an issue just like this. This isn't the first time that Ferrucci has had issues like this. So at what point are we recognizing a pattern of behavior and then that's when you implement something. That's when you take action for it versus, oh, we're just like seeing this happen. Like we're just wiping our hands clean of it. So, I mean, like I said, I want to see something happen and I don't know what, because again, I'm not paid enough to make these choices. But I want to see something that makes me feel a little bit more content with being able to be like, okay, I can trust this series to kind of go in a good way, you know, address things that are extremely harmful and want to try and do better. And yeah, I don't know. I want it, but I'm not necessarily hopeful.
And that, I guess, kind of all the off track drama at the moment. Off track, on track, I guess a little bit of both.
It's more off track that had on track ramifications.
That's a better way to put it. We'll see where this leads. All right.
Well,
on to the actual race.
Yeah, the more entertaining, the reason we have this whole thing started. So I was doing a little bit of digging just because of, again, I only saw like 53 laps of racing.
And 34 of those were under caution?
No, there were 8 cautions and 47 caution laps in the first 73 laps. The longest span of green flag racing, just take a guess.
Probably the 20 laps at the end.
13. 13 laps was the longest stint of green flag racing during this entire 100-lap race, which is absurd.
Cancel the streets of Detroit.
Detroit, I love you as a city, but my God. Like, we couldn't even get one turn into the race. We couldn't get one turn into Monaco. We couldn't get one turn into the 500. We can't get one turn into Detroit. Are we ever going to have a first lap without a racing incident, without a caution?
Odds are low, but we can find out this weekend.
We will find out.
Maybe we need to start keeping like a whiteboard tracker of like days since turn 1 incidences.
Yep, that's gonna be a running gag now. A running bit. So yeah, that was a lot of caution flags. Colton was doing a really phenomenal job through most of it. I think him and Kyle were doing phenomenal with their decision-making skills during those cautions.
And the strategy for both of them. And when we get to like biggest winners, biggest losers, I'll add to that. But
yeah, I was honestly really surprised at how the strategies played out. You know, like we had obviously the cautions and then, you know, we get through 10, 11 laps of racing. And then all of a sudden you hear that Pelot is struggling on the alternates on the greens. So Alex was struggling on those greens after like 11 laps. Like he was getting major dag in the rears. And, you know, commentators were saying like, oh, this has really thrown a full blown wrench into strategy plans, because all of a sudden you hear Pelot reporting this to his strategist, and then all of a sudden you hear everyone else on the radio being like, oh, well, Pelot is struggling on the greens. And so that now suddenly changes everything. And Kyle was on the greens for a long first stint. I was very, very surprised. But again, he made some really, really impressive calls in terms of his strategy within all of those like caution laps. And, you know, with the rain that suddenly showed up.
So that's what I was going to bring up, was the sudden rain really. And like you had Colton come in and switch for wet tires and kind of put him on the back foot in a call that was just kind of like he was at his strategist for being like, why did no one see rain? And they were like, because the rain's not on the radar, buddy. Like, yeah. I don't know what you want us to do here.
Yeah, I mean, they cut to like the actual radar itself and there was nothing that was there. And so, you know, I do think a lot of them did make a pretty decent call with trying to go onto the wets, because if all of a sudden there's rain, but there wasn't any on the radar, you don't know how long this is going to last. And I mean, like you could see with Kyle in particular, he was struggling like when that rain was the heaviest. But I gotta give him props again of just taking that risk. That to me is huge. That is a racing driver mentality of like, you know what? It's a risk, but it's a risk I'm willing to take. And it paid off for him. Would have loved to have seen him on a podium. But, overall, I think he ran a really, really good race and made a lot of really good strategy calls. I just don't think the cautions fell in his favor this time.
Not at all. I think we also had a bit of an Indy 500 hangover, which is a trend that we've kind of seen the last few years. I could be making this stat up, but I think I heard it on the broadcast correctly that it's been 24 years since the Indy 500 winner has won the next race. So for better or worse, Joseph Newgarden kind of fell into that trend of you win the Indy 500, you are not going to have a really good race the next one up.
Yeah, he struggled. He wasn't I didn't really pay attention to his race at all, except for the fact that he had an issue on pit lane with his fuel. That was crazy to see.
Because he ran over the gun and something happened with one of his crew members. I don't know if he hit her with the car or if she got hit by the wheel gun that he ran over. But thankfully she was okay, but that was pretty scary incident there.
Yeah. I mean, there was that. There was also the fact that, the fueling, mechanism itself was having issues, too. So, he wasn't running at his full capacity because of fuel. That threw a wrench into his plans. And
he and Flo hit each other later on in the race, which kind of ruined both their races towards that end. Not that either of them at that point were having particularly good races, but it kind of just went from, bad to worse.
Yeah.
And I want to say Joseph finished 26 out of 27 drivers, and the only person who finished under him was Rasmus with a mechanical failure. So,
and I was honestly really surprised at Palou too, because he finished 16th and had a really unremarkable race. And him finishing 16th snapped his streak of 23 consecutive finishes in the top 8. That is an absurd stat. That to me is very comparable to Max making all of these records in F1.
100%.
And he's just insane. So the fact that he had an incredibly unremarkable race and finished that low was just kind of very surprising to me.
I think unremarkable is really kind of, for the majority of the drivers, kind of a good word for it. Because, I mean, you look at that, all 3 McLaren drivers finished in the top 10.
Yeah.
Other than, Pourchaire's incident, I couldn't really tell you what happened with their races. You didn't hear about Pato. You didn't hear about Rossi. It was unremarkable. There wasn't anything to write home about other than the benefit if they got points.
Yeah. I will say, though, Rossi finished 5th. I mean, Rossi has been really strong the past several races. And I think, his stat for this race was that he finished 8th or better in his last 3 starts. So that's a really good stat for him. Yeah. But, I mean, coming in 5th is not really something to write home about.
He did have a big comeback drive, which is part of the issue. Is he's not having good qualifying. Lord knows we love Rossi around here, but he's not qualifying well. He'll admit to it. Yeah. And so it's just, you look at the results and you're like, okay, I mean, it's not bad, but it's not good either.
It's not great, yeah. And then, you look at Pato's race, he kind of got shunted in the opening turns, and after really tough qualifying from the recap that I had seen where he stalled out because of traffic, not making it into the fast 6, I know that he's frustrated with his results too. But again, him finishing where he did, not terrible in the grand scheme of things, but also not good and not what I'm sure he wanted post 500, and also not what he wanted in terms of points for the championship either.
So wrap up Detroit. Who do you have your biggest losers for the race?
Palou. I think Palou might be my biggest loser for this one. Just again, his result being 16th and his issues with tire deg to start him off was just shocking. And, it just kind of felt like a totally different driver than I'm used to seeing. So he is, for me, my biggest loser for the week. I hate calling him that because he's not.
We can workshop alternate names. If anyone has suggestions, let us know.
Yeah.
But for me, I think it would probably go with it's got to be Colton and Kyle to an extent too. I mean, Colton finished P19 and he did have an incident, which I tell y'all, I saw it twice. I still really don't know what happened. I don't know if I care to know what happened. I just know he finished P19. He did end up finishing on the lead lap. It kind of caused Scott Dixon some issues, but to go from being on pole, leading the race, to just kind of got caught out in the mess and wasn't anything good. And then Kyle really had a chance to win this thing. He really did. And unfortunately, the cautions just cost him. And that's not on him. That's not on Brian with the strategy. I think they did everything they could. It was just a matter of he had to go into fuel saving at the end, and it kind of got to the point that P4 was the best that could be possible, which is frustrating because I'm sure if you ask him, and I think he said in some of his post-race stuff, that it's like he could have won, but didn't go his way, and that's racing.
So then who is your biggest winner for the week?
It feels cliche to say the podium as a whole, but I think it has to be podium as a whole. Good recovery for Marcus Ericsson to go from a horrible Indy 500.
Horrible month of May, just in general.
May in general. And then to come into the weekend, like his car on Friday was garbage. He was having a lot of issues. They had to change the battery. Like he didn't get a lot of running at first practice. Maybe not any running. I can't remember for sure. I think maybe it was 4 laps. So like he was really struggling. So to come up and then end up P2, like kudos to Marcus. I think he needed that. Scott Dixon, I think he has 9 more wins, and then he will be the all-time IndyCar leading like race winner.
It was really cool to see that he was the one that won after everything, again, the month of May, seeing him kind of struggle a little bit there when we know how good he is out there. And he did run a very good race. So that was fun to kind of see him succeed there. For me, my biggest winner is Marcus Armstrong. I am so proud of this kid. I have been following him since his F2 days. And like, he's such a good race driver. Like, he is such a good driver. And I think a lot of people kind of wrote him off for so long just because, like, oh, he's a rookie. He's so young. He's coming from the Formula Series. He's coming from F2. But he's an F2 winner. Like, you don't win in these series unless you're really good. And he is. Also just like a really nice guy. Like, we met him at Barber. He was really kind, stopped for pictures, chatted for a moment. And, my little sidebar, my little 1A for biggest winners is Angela Cullen. Because she's his physio, and I love Angela, coming from her being Lewis Hamilton's physio for years. She's also a really cool person. You should look into her if you don't know who she is. But seeing her look of pure excitement when he got onto the podium was just kind of like, yeah, girl, same. That's how I feel. So seeing Marcus on the podium for the very first time in IndyCar is my biggest win, and I'm so proud of him. So here's to many more, Marcus Armstrong.
I think that kind of wraps up good, bad, ugly, controversial with Detroit. Now, new segment that hopefully will help others out as much as it's hopefully going to help me. Dumb Questions with Megan, where I ask Meg dumb questions that I could probably easily look up, but I'm going to make her explain to me instead.
This is what I'm here for. I have dragged you into this world of IndyCar, so the least I could do is answer all your questions.
So, first one is, how are numbers assigned in Indy? Because I know for like Formula One, like the drivers pick their numbers and it seems like it's a very big deal. And that definitely does not seem to be the case when we are talking about IndyCar. So what's going on there?
So you kind of touched on it with the Formula One drivers. For those of you who may not know, in Formula One, drivers pick their numbers as they enter the series, and that number follows them regardless of where they go. So like Sebastian Vettel, let's just go with him because that's the first one on my mind. Like Sebastian Vettel came in with number 5, right? So he went to Toro Rosso and then he went to Red Bull with the racing number 5. And he went to Ferrari with number 5. The only exception in Formula One where you can change your number is if you have won the championship and you get the iconic number 1. Max Verstappen, he's raced under 33 for the majority of his racing career. In the past few years, because he's been world champion, he has been number 1. But he still has the number 33 attached to his name because that is the number that he chose. So shifting gears, in IndyCar, the teams are the ones that pick the numbers instead of the drivers. And so you get drivers who go from team to team with different numbers. So like Felix Rosenqvist was the number 6 driver for Arrow McLaren last year and the years that he was driving. But right now at Meyer Shank, he is driving the number 60 car. So despite the fact that, you know, Felix Rosenqvist is Felix Rosenqvist regardless of his team, you know, he went from the number 6 car in Arrow McLaren to now being the number 60 car in Meyer Shank. So the rule specifically, this is going to get a little wordy, but this is coming directly from IndyCar. So blame them, not me. It says, Rule 4.5.3.3. After a car number is assigned to a particular entrant license, it will remain with that entrant license until they are no longer a full season entrant, provided that entrant enters a car and displays the car number on the car at each event. If the entrant does not enter a car and or display the car number at the event, IndyCar may reassign the car number. So basically, teams pick the numbers, and they have to have a full-time car with that car number displayed on it at every single event in order for them to keep their number for however many years they want. So again, Arrow McLaren, they have 5, 6, and 7. They're going to keep cars 5, 6, and 7 as long as they continue to have drivers who are entering in every single event under the 5, 6, and 7 car number. If for whatever reason, they are unable to run a number on an event on a car, IndyCar is under the discretion to take that number and reassign it elsewhere. So that's essentially what it is. So I hope that answers your question.
It does. I do have a follow-up that you may or may not know. But
Okay.
So are the numbers though just kind of arbitrarily picked by the team? Like with Arrow McLaren using 5, 6, 7, like did they just decide those were the numbers they wanted to go with? Or is there a rhyme or reason for that?
Yeah, so I think there has been instances where teams and particularly like CEOs or principals or, you know, those guys want a particular number. Like I know the Penske cars try to keep within like the first few numbers. Like Joseph Newgarden is number 2. They tend to want to run like the 2, 3, 4, I think it is. But you have Will Power, whose kind of brand is the number 12. And so he's kind of gone from place to place with the number 12. And so Penske kind of was like, all right, it's Will Power. We're going to kind of let you do your thing. And so they now have the number 12. You know, you think about Pato O'Ward, whose whole kind of brand is number 5 as well. So occasionally you will get those drivers who do have that branding as their number, but it's very rare. I think there's also been some superstitions with numbers about like haunted numbers. I read that somewhere. I didn't really deep dive into that because I didn't feel like it spooky at school when I was doing this research. So I kind of put that off to the side. Maybe that'll be a Halloween thing months down the line. But yeah, there are teams that do like to try and keep the numbers consolidated. Like you mentioned, McLaren has 5, 6, and 7. They're kind of together. Andretti has their numbers close together as well. Penske likes to keep theirs close, but again, that exception for Will Power. It's not an exact science, but it does seem to be less about the driver wanting the number and more so the team and Indy and what is actually available. So I hope that answers your question.
All right, ready to preview Road America.
Yeah, Road America. It is an interesting one. Pull up some notes. So Road America is yet another road course. It is 55 laps. It is about 4 miles per lap with 14 turns. Last year was real weird. So last year they had repaved the actual circuit itself. And so that caused a whole lot of problems. So when they repave it, it makes the track incredibly, incredibly smooth. And so these drivers are going out on fresh tires and just have zero grip. And so you get a lot of drivers who are kind of like spinning out, slipping and sliding. It made overtakes on turns really interesting to watch. So to give you a preview of what last year looked like, our podium was Palou, Newgarden, and O'Ward. So we had Alex, Joseph, and Pato going in order of things that had happened. So we had our boys, Kyle and Pato. Lap 1, Kyle ran into the back of Pato. It was a complete like rear end on that one. And
Kyle, you gotta stop meeting people like this.
I know. So Kyle rear-ended Pato, and Kyle had spun out, and he brought out the first caution of the race because he couldn't get his car to restart. So marshals had to come in and do the manual restart. But he did bring it back, and he finished 9th. So massive mover during the race. Then on the next bout of green flag racing, Pato hit Ferrucci, and he received a blocking penalty. And so he had to give up 2 positions. So luckily it was just like, drop back 2 positions and not a full stop and go. Then we had Joseph, who kind of hip checked Lundgaard, who sent Lundgaard off track. Rinus VK hit Felix Rosenquist, and Romain Grosjean got stuck in the gravel. And that one was by his own volition. He did that himself. And so Roman going into the gravel brought out the second caution. And then Marcus Armstrong and VK got unsafe release penalties in the pit lane. VK had blocked Kyle in the pit. That it really was very unsafe watching how those two kind of interacted on pit lane. Was not a fan, was holding my breath the whole time. So yeah, then we had a whole bunch of racing. But then, the fourth and final caution of the race was our poor little brother, David Malukas. His car had died, so there was no contact. I think the car just died. And so that had brought out the final caution. And this is where the race had gotten interesting. So Herta was leading literally like practically the entire race. Like he was doing so well. And unfortunately, it had just come down to pit stops and strategies for Colton. So like I said, Colton had been leading up until that fourth and final caution, and that was on lap 40, and that was when he went into the pits. So Colton went into the pits lap 40, but Alex Palou and Joseph Newgarden stayed out an additional lap. And so because the circuit is 4 miles, it is a very long one. And so as a result, Colton had to go into fuel saving, which cost him his podium. And so he got past, ending up actually in P5. So that was a heartbreaking race to watch for Colton because, again, he was doing so well. And he was doing really well the whole weekend, truly. Like, his pole laps were great. Qualifying just the entire day was fantastic. And, you know, him just leading the whole race and losing it like that just because of fuel saving is genuinely heartbreaking. So I feel for Colton, and I hope this year turns out a little bit better for him. So yeah, personally, I think Marcus Armstrong is going to be one to watch this year at this particular race because he was doing very, very well the whole race as well. He was leading it for several laps as well. He was in podium positions for the most part, but again, strategy just did not play in his favor. And considering he's going to be coming off of a high from Detroit, I think he's going to really be feeling himself a little bit and kind of have a little bit more confidence to himself that maybe we haven't necessarily seen from him so far. And yeah, Road America, it's going to be interesting.
What do you have for your podium prediction?
Pato, Rossi, Kyle. I said it last week. I'll say it again, and I'll say it until it's true.
And boy, do I want it to be true. I feel like this might be a good weekend for Scotty Mack.
Yes.
He's been good at road courses this year, so I won't be shocked to see him and the Penskes do well.
Yeah, I think Pelot is also going to be really interesting to see him come back because he kind of ran a very understated race last year with this. Like, he really wasn't leading. Like, he was just kind of hunting the whole time. Like, when I was rewatching the recap of it, like to get ready for the podcast, I was just like watching him in the background because everyone was talking about Bolton and people were talking about like the caution. Scott Dixon and Will Power were really interesting to watch. So people were talking about others. And for me, just the mental image that I have in the background of my mind when I was watching it was just kind of like the Jaws theme song coming from the back of Alex Pelot. So, I think he's going to be interesting to watch, and coming off of a pretty bleak Detroit and coming off of a 500 where I wish he did better at the 500. So I think, yeah, Pelot is one to watch. Armstrong is going to be one to watch, but in my heart and in my soul, I have to go with Pato Rossi Kyle.
Only other thing I have for Road America, Dale Coyne Racing is going to be having Luca Giotto. I apologize if I'm saying this name wrong. This is literally just announced before we started recording, but he was at Barber, so I guess in theory we saw him at Barber. Yeah, so he's back for at least the next 2 races.
So yeah, that pretty much wraps us up for this week's podcast. And what do we have coming up after Road America?
So we have an off week until the weekend of the 23rd, and then we go to Monterey. So California, I think usually it's a pretty fun track as well. So we'll fill stuff in the meantime. At some point, we're going to do a preview of the hybrids and put Meg's brain to work because she's done a lot of good research on this, and I'm excited to hear about it. But yeah, we'll be back next week, I guess, to recap Road America and figure out what our first off week as podcasters looks like. And then current standings, just to finish that up, backwards order again, Joseph Newgarden is in 10th, Felix Rosenquist is in 9th, Scott McLaughlin in 8th, Colton Herta in 7th, Kyle Kirkwood in 6th, Alexander Rossi in 5th, Pato Award in 4th, Will Powers in 3rd, Alex Blows in 2nd, and your new IndyCar race series leader is Scott Dixon.
Yeah, we're really shaking things up. I'm excited to see how kind of like the middle guys of that list kind of shake out because the points are very, very close.
Yes.
It's tight. So I'm very interested to see how these standings kind of shake up. But shout out Scott Dixon for being our new championship leader right now.
That's all I got.
That's all I got. That brings us to the end of this week's episode.
Follow us on Instagram at Racing Thoughts Podcast. We will continue to post on our stories, probably more than any of y'all want, but we will be there. Look for this episode wherever podcasts are available. All right. That's it, y'all. We will see you next week.
See you next week, guys. Bye.
Bye.